Hello, IEF community, and welcome to today's live meetup. We're going to begin our 4 p.m. panel. Let me start. I'll introduce myself. I'm Andy Brunelle. I'm a board member of Idaho Environmental Forum and have served on the board for many years. I want to thank you all for joining us in this very different time that we're living in, and different time for Idaho Environmental Forum. As many of you know, this week we have been stringing out since Monday at 4 p.m. We had the last 3 days remarks from Speaker Scott Bedke. Traditionally, he has spoken at our IEF legislative forecast. We also had Governor Brad Little address the group. And then yesterday, we also had a discussion on the governor's salmon work group product. Those were all recorded sessions that we had. Today, we're going live with our news media panel at 4 p.m., which was normally what we would do, meeting in person. We would end our afternoon session with a 4 p.m. news media panel. And so thank you all for getting on. For anybody who has their camera on, we ask that you turn off your camera and have your microphone muted so that we can not have interruptions on the panel discussion. The panel today will be moderated by Rocky Barker, and I will turn it over to him soon. We do want to thank the Langdon Group for providing the hosting services for this afternoon, stepping up to help us with this Zoom event. We'd like to also thank all of our current sponsors of Idaho Environmental Forum who provide financial support for this organization, and ask that when you have the time, take a look at our sponsor list that we have on our website at idahoenvironmentalforum.org. So with that, Rocky, retired outdoor environmental reporter at Idaho Statesman, and prior to that, when you and I first met at the Idaho Falls Post-Register, longtime reporter here in Idaho on environmental issues. We appreciate you stepping up today to be our panel moderator, and I'll turn things over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. You know, that sets things up I mean, for me, everything is about what a long, strange trip this has been. But for all of us, at least since last March, what a long, strange trip this has been. And welcome everybody to the Idaho Environmental Forum Environmental Pundits panel, so to speak. And we are coming a day after the inauguration of President Biden, and it's kind of an exciting time on a lot of fronts on environmental issues. A lot of change going on. Let me introduce our panel. Even though we call ourselves cousin, Eric is not my cousin. Eric Barker, the environment and outdoor editor up at the Lewiston Tribune, and we've reported from across the state at for a long time together. We've got Keith Riddler at the Associated Press, who covers an amazing amount of environmental reporting in his extremely large beat covering Idaho for Associated Press. Keith Riddler, and Nicole Blanchard at my old alma mater, the Idaho Statesman. She's the outdoor reporter. She covers a lot of outdoor news and environmental news. So we've got quite a group, and I think we got a good show to talk about today. One of the things I wanted folks to remember, you know how we run around and pass out questions for everybody, and then somebody will come and pick them up. today I'd like you to go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and to the chat and put your questions in there. And I'll look at them and direct after we're done having our discussion. So let me start off. So we've got a new administration in. Keith, talk to me a little bit about what the last administration was doing at the last minute here in Idaho that affects our lives in Idaho, and how much you think that's going to last.
I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, Biden, and being president a little over 24 hours, has already issued a lot of things, all big headline stuff. It's probably, most of it's going to affect Idaho. I'm actually had to make a list that I've been, checking my browser to see if anything drops. But, we signed an executive order rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. He's put a moratorium on drilling oil and gas, drilling the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, revoked the Keystone XL pipeline. Just today suspended oil and gas leasing on U.S. lands. I think one of the interesting things that you just mentioned, Rocky, or asked about is sage grouse. Trump, near the end, released his latest plan for sage grouse, which had been rejected by Judge Beelan Windmill here in Idaho back in 2019. It was Trump's 2017 plan. But the Biden administration probably isn't going to defend the Trump. Yeah, what is going to affect Idaho, just besides all this headline stuff that's been happening lately, if you just compare and contrast some cabinet picks, Rockies, it's kind of the grinding out work that you see a lot that comes out of these agencies. And for the EPA, you might remember Scott Pruitt. A lot of people kind of wondered if he even believed in the EPA's mission. Biden has gone with Michael Regan, a North Carolina environmental regulator, apparently, pretty highly regarded. In the interior, you remember Ryan Zinke, one of his first things was to look at shrinking monuments, including one in Idaho. They didn't touch that one. They did a couple in Utah. Biden's already looking at taking those back to what they were before Trump shrunk them. Of course, now Deb Haaland will be running that agency, first Native American Democrat from New Mexico representative. And finally, the Energy Department. This will be a kind of a big one for Idaho. It was Rick Perry, former governor of Texas, oil and gas guy. Now it's going to be Jennifer Granholm. She's kind of looking at electric vehicles for increase those in the road, which will be a key part in Biden's plan to get the U.S. to being carbon neutral by 2050. Also, one thing that's not going to change for Idaho is the nuclear research. I don't think it'll. Trump, they went forward with a lot of research there that started actually under the Obama administration to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with more nuclear power. Trump continued that. I expect that to continue with Biden. Of course, that's good news for people at the Idaho National Laboratory, a big employer in Idaho, and a lot of research going on there.
That'll be something to watch with the new energy secretary. So Eric, you've got the Nez Perce tribe in your backyard. What do they think of the new Interior Secretary?
Well, I think they're happy with the selection. I talked to Tribal Chairman Shannon Wheeler recently, and he generally gave the Interior Department good marks for their consultation, government-to-government relationship with the tribe. But he did note with Deb Haaland in there, perhaps, when they have those talks, they'll listen a little closer and maybe take the tribe's concerns into account more. There's lots of ways that could play out. I think they're also happy kind of that the Biden administration, compared to the Trump administration, is probably going to pay a lot more attention to climate change. President Trump viewed it as a hoax, and President Biden views it as a crisis, one that he's kind of building his presidency around, one of the key issues he wants to fix. So I think that'll be a big change in the administrations. And I've had sources tell me that they think, you know, federal land managers are really sort of eager now with the change to dig into some climate change stuff and to be more sort of forward and out there about that kind of thing, because they know it's real and they know that there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, obviously, when you look at the Idaho National Laboratory, Keith, you look at public lands and programs there are initiatives to protect public lands as a part of a climate package. And it seems like all of this could make for some changes. And the fact is, though, that we've got a Democrat as the president usually means in Idaho that Idaho immediately kind of goes into defense mode, right?
Absolutely. I'm at the State House now. You can kind of sense it. Yeah, pretty much. That's exactly it. I haven't seen any legislation about that right now. Usually their main thing is some kind of resolution stating their opposition to something or other, but none of those at the moment. They're mostly, fighting to take power from the governor at the moment. Well, we might see some resolutions more on a national scale later.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I heard that they were talking about wolves yesterday, Nicole. What was that about?
That was a report from Fish and Game on depredation and budgets and whatnot. They let the legislators know that about 100 wolves were killed by Fish and Game in the last year for depredation. So that's, preying on livestock and whatnot. And that should be an interesting conversation next week. Fish and Game is going to be updating the Fish and Game Commission is going to be updating on the wolf population, which was around 1,500 animals this time last year, right around when they implemented opened up the season basically to year-round in some places. So it'll be interesting to see where the population is at now with that taken into account. Yeah.
Well, I imagine the Fish and Game Commission is going to get us a pretty good idea of where we're at, and I don't think they can kill enough wolves to make hunters happy, right?
There's definitely, that sentiment that folks just want them gone still. I reported recently just on a video a woman recorded as she was driving from her home in Stanley to her work in Sun Valley. She came across a pack of about 10 wolves just in the road while she was driving. And our story on that in her original post, I would say overwhelmingly probably 95% of the comments had to do with hunting wolves, trapping, wolf removal. So yeah, it's definitely still a controversial topic here, a hot topic.
You certainly hear about that up your way, don't you, Eric?
Oh, certainly, yes. Always a hot topic. Since wolves were delisted in Idaho, we don't hear it quite as much. I also cover Eastern Washington, where they're still, they're delisted there, but the state of Washington lists them. So I hear a little bit more noise there. I recently wrote a story about a University of Idaho study. There's a sort of debate in the science community about hunting and harvest in a place like Idaho and how effective it is about reducing wolf density and wolf populations. A lot of people think that wolves from our big wilderness areas would just kind of pour in and fill any reductions would kind of buoy the populations. And they found that not to be the case, that roving wolves joining established packs that have been reduced is really quite rare and doesn't happen very much, and happens about the same rate pre-harvest, post-harvest. So that was a bit of good news for wildlife managers that want to use harvest to manage the wolf population. Interesting.
So one of the things that that they were working on, the Trump administration was working on, the Environmental Protection Agency was working on something with Midas Gold. And I'm wondering if one of you guys who's covered Midas Gold knows what that was, and they just had a decision, right?
That's right. I can take that. The EPA and the Forest Service recently gave Midas Gold the approval to start, the first part of its remedial work, the cleanup work from past mining pollution. Now, the company doesn't have permission to do the mining that it wants to do yet, but it did get the go-ahead to start moving some polluted material around, start addressing some of the problems there. That'll probably start this spring after a thaw and snow melt. I think they feel real good about that. They feel that that's progress. It remains, like the whole stibnite mine remains controversial. As you may know, the Nez Perce are very opposed to it, and they were not happy with this decision. They say the cleanup is just going to scratch the surface, and they believe it just kind of allows the company to kind of do some prep work that will help it mine. Which we were talking about Deb Holland being at Interior. So EPA is an Interior agency. So perhaps the Nez Perce will have an ear there.
Well, what do you think, Keith? Do you think that it'll hold up in the new administration?
No, it's hard to say. I mean, it's everything kind of sounds good just from a very rough look at it. There's 100 years of mining pollution there. Midas Gold has never actually mined at all in that area, but their plan is to clean up 2 giant pits, open gold mining pits, and restore the area. But in the process, they're going to make an additional open pit gold mine and enlarge another one. There's 4,000 ounces of gold there, put 500 people to work with good paying jobs for 25 years. So, and then on the negative side, the tribe is very concerned about the river below that area, which still contains good spawning habitat for salmon and steelhead, which are listed. I don't know if it's going to hold up or not. Last year, the year before, an environmental group called Earthworks gave me some information from public records requests where it turned out, Midas Gold was helping to write in a part of an environmental study that is typically reserved for the Forest Service. So I think there are a lot of environmental groups watching this one very closely, and they're going to be checking everything, and more than likely lawsuits will follow. There already are a couple. The Nez Perce tribe has sued Midas Gold. Midas Gold has sued the U.S. government involving the pollution up there. I think all we can say for sure is that there are going to be more lawsuits.
Well, that won't be a surprise. Lawsuits are they go on all the time. You covered Eric yesterday. You had the story about the Enviros suing on salmon.
Yes.
Again. Just tell us about that.
Well, that's how long has that been going on? For 20 years now? I can't remember what iteration.
Yeah, I think it's 28 years actually.
28 years. Yes. Started
with Idaho.
Right. So this past year, the federal government came up with a new biological opinion. They also issued an EIS that said, how they were going to manage the Columbia and Snake River hydropower system in a way that doesn't further push salmon towards extinction. They considered breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams. They said probably be the best thing to do, but they didn't choose that, said it would be too expensive, and instead landed on a plan to spill water at the dams, kind of speed up travel time, have fish avoid, juvenile fish avoid the turbines, avoid juvenile bypass systems. And so that's kind of where they're at. And the environmental groups weren't really happy with that, of course they wanted to see breach. They don't think it's enough. And so they're going back to back to court, back to Judge Simon's court, suing under the ESA and NEPA and Administrative Procedures Act. And they've got a terrific track record. I don't think they've lost one yet. So we'll see. And, you know, those usually take a year or two to play out.
Absolutely. And Keith, you've done some salmon reporting recently. Talk about that.
I did a story, I think about a month ago before the State House started. This was kind of a unique story. It involved the middle fork of the Salmon River. There's a run of Chinook salmon there, which scientists consider kind of a great way for an experiment in the entire Pacific Northwest. This run, its habitat, it's mostly in the Frank Church River of northern wilderness, so it's pristine. And as you know, Justin Hayes was saying on the other day on the earlier broadcast of one of these, that there are 4 things that affect salmon coming back to Idaho: the habitat, hatchery, harvest, and hydro. So for this particular group of salmon, their habitat is great. There isn't much harvest. There's not much hatchery influence. So all it is hydro that they're looking at. And so 900 fish returned last year, even though there's pristine habitat. And so the theory is that the only thing that's holding them back is the hydro. And this is a run that historically the estimate had 150,000 fish returning, even as recently as the 50s and 60s, 50 to 60,000 fish. So that was just an interesting story, that there's this kind of control group of fish in Idaho that maybe says all this work we're doing on restoring habitat, it's all good, of course, but it seems to indicate that might not be enough for the Pacific Northwest if you want to, like the Salmon Work Group said, get salmon back to Idaho, and more than just enough to get them off the endangered species list.
So Nicole, what do you think is going to happen for the salmon fishing season this year? Have you heard anything? It's certainly important for the outfitters that you've written some good stories about their plight.
Sure, I haven't heard anything. I mean, just the way things have gone recently, I wouldn't say it's super optimistic. I know the last couple seasons have been rough. And then this last season with COVID, there were a ton of restrictions on folks that really shut down a lot of outfitters and hit them hard. The previous year, the last couple of years actually, with salmon and steelhead with restrictions on some of that, has been really difficult for a lot of outfitters.
Yeah. So, you know, the other story you did this in the last year that it's going to be interesting to see. We've had a couple of fairly light years on fire.
We have, yeah.
Talk about that, and talk about what your research showed and what you think is going to happen this year.
Sure. So in the last year, you know, I've been talking with climate scientists, with Forest Service folks, just about all the really mild seasons that we've had as far as fires in the last probably 4 years, particularly in Southwest Idaho. I think the last really big fire that we can point to would probably be the Pioneer back in 2016. And by a lot of calculations from climate scientists, it's looking like where, you know, Ada County in the past maybe would have had a really large wildfire like that every 10 to 20 years, that's something we can start expecting every maybe 5 to 10 years now. And with that coming up on 5 years with the Pioneer fire, it's going to be interesting to see how this coming fire season plays out. With our neighboring states in California and Oregon, they've had these massive, you know, record-setting wildfire seasons these last couple of years, while Idaho really has not had a lot. And that's pulled resources too, that from folks that could be doing prescribed burns, that could be doing some thinning that would help prevent future fires here in Idaho. So yeah, it's just a matter of time. I think a lot of climate scientists say it's just a matter of time before we get another big burn like that.
Well, we've got about 70% of the forest of southern Idaho have burned since I started covering this stuff about, I hate to say it, 30 years ago. So that probably has had some impact. Certainly had to give, there's a lot more defensible space, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely been quite a bit of fire on the landscape. I mean, as you know, there's been a whole host of noteworthy ones, even just in the last decade. And we've been lucky, and hopefully we won't see something similar to, you know, what happened in Washington, Oregon, California this last year, where there were multiple really big fires that were urban and wildland interface and destroyed a lot of property and took some lives. So hopefully that's something that we can avoid with the fires and the preparation that we've had.
Yeah, California had a fire that was evacuating people just like a week or two ago.
Yeah.
This is January still.
Mm-hmm. Red flag warnings in San Francisco. Yeah, it's wild.
Eric, you live in the land of the asbestos forest, North Idaho. But 2015, we both probably spent quite a bit of time in the middle of some flames. What do you think's going on up there? You definitely are getting a lot of timber cutting. Is that helping?
Yeah, I think so. This last year, the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest was the #4 producing timber forest in the country. You know, they say they're really looking at restoration and the timber as an output. And when they talk about restoration, you know, protecting rural communities from fire is one of the things they do. But you know, every year we brace for a big fire season. And it's just a matter of how dry it is, you know, whether we get a key, you know, rainstorm in the middle of the summer and whether we get the strikes. You know, sort of the land managers try to do this mix of harvest around communities, and then, you know, somewhat in the front country, and the use of prescribed fire as much as they can, although there's been some studies showing that the agency is quite far behind its goals in that. And then the use of a natural fire, letting fires burn, you know, way out in places like the Selway Wilderness or the roadless areas of the North Fork of the Clearwater, where you mentioned you have naturally extremely long fire intervals, but it has been a long time, and with climate change, we're more and more vulnerable. So it's a tricky sort of tightrope they try to walk, and then of course when you do prescribed burns, where you allow fires to burn, you're making smoke. And I think all of us across the West have been accustomed, we don't like it, but we're becoming more accustomed to having smoke be part of our summers. And so yeah, try to manage the air shed is another difficult task for these fire managers and land managers.
Well, you know, it's one of the things I find interesting about this change of administrations. Vilsack is going to be the ag secretary again.
That's right.
He was ag secretary for Obama, and he's the one who came up with the good neighbor policy that then Governor Otter embraced, and it's kind of at the center of Governor Little's programs. Keith, you've been covering both of those, in the forest and on the rangeland. Talk about that a little bit.
Governor Little is all in on that, absolutely. And he would like to expand that to rangeland stuff as well. But yeah, the governor sees it as a good way for actually state land managers, state foresters, look at federal lands and help with the sale of those federal, you know, timber sales. They still have to go through environmental processes, NEPA. They're still, you know, fully under the control of the federal government. However, it does speed up the process because there are just more workers out there, and it's all done financially. It's not costing the state anything. In fact, Idaho was, the Good Neighbor Authority was kind of leading the way on that. And I've attended some Idaho land board meetings, and I know other states have been contacting Idaho to say, how are you guys doing this?
Well, that's interesting. That's one of the things I didn't quite understand in Governor Little's speech. he brought up this, he talked about some advocates were pushing for climate fire, and he didn't like that, and he didn't want climate fire. He wanted us to do active management. And I was thinking about this. I mean, most of the environmental community in Idaho are working on these forest partnerships, and they're supporting active management. And nobody that I know is actually saying, let the climate control fires. I mean, but the climate is controlling the fires whether we like it or not. Did you hear that statement he made?
I did. Well, Governor Little is a politician. I think he was feeding the base a little bit there. He's taking a beating for the whole coronavirus thing, the stay-at-home order he did in March. And in fact, the State House now is fighting him on emergency declaration. So I think a lot of that was just to maybe placate the base, and he is a really conservative guy. He's cut regulations. I don't think there's much doubt about that, but I think he wanted to throw a line in there, just to, a political line. I couldn't make much sense of it though.
I'll say, Rocky, that it's true. There's been a lot of collaboration in the conservation community, and the federal land managers agree on a lot of stuff on timber goals and stuff. But there are still some groups out there, and maybe that's what the governor was referencing. Groups like Friends of the Clearwater, who do sort of very much support natural processes and don't like harvest. So perhaps that's what he was talking about.
Yeah. I can see that. They're very, very active and aggressive when they need to be, Gary and the crew. So one of the things up your way, and Nicole, you've covered this too, is the return of grizzly bears to central Idaho. Nicole, tell me a little bit. You've reported on this a little bit. Tell us what we know so far.
Sure, there have been a few different bears that have been tracked, whether that's seen on trail cameras. Some of them have left behind some hair that has been DNA tested by Fish and Game and determined to be grizzlies, some footprints, stuff like that. And then some radio collared bears too that have come down out of the kind of the Bitter Roots and Cabinet Mountains in Montana down into central Idaho. And there's still not really a lot of consensus about, if this means that populations are really recovered, if this just means that bears are wandering farther in search of food sources. But this past year, especially this last 6 months, there have been quite a few bear encounters in Idaho. There were a couple groups of archery hunters that ran into grizzlies, one in Fremont County and one up north. Some folks out at Henry's Lake Park last spring ran into a grizzly bear, and a man actually got attacked by a female grizzly bear with cubs and managed to survive that. But yeah, we've had a lot more interaction with grizzlies, I think, in the last year than we've seen before, and a lot more of them popping up, whether it's in sort of the Grangeville area or just throughout the different forests and whatnot in central Idaho.
Well, that's yet another case of our favorite law, the Endangered Species Act. Eric, people your way had the chance about 20 years ago to, is it 20 years ago? Yeah,
I think so, yeah.
To have them introduced and with lower protections, and that we rejected that as a state, and then the federal government. So they're in your backyard, right?
That's right. 20 years ago, they would have been an experimental population, much like wolves. They would have been easier to manage, easier to remove wolves. Governor Kempthorne was quite against it at the time. This was sort of in the waning days, if I'm remembering right, of the Clinton administration. The Bush administration came in and nixed it. So now when grizzly bears are coming back to the Bitterroot, and they tend just to be wandering through, they haven't determined to be a population here. They're fully protected bears, and so they have all the protections of the Endangered Species Act. So whether that was a missed opportunity for Idaho or not, we don't know. Up here, 2019 was the year of the bear. We had 3 or 4 different grizzly bears wandering through different parts of the Bitterroot. Much quieter in 2020. We started out with one in the spring, and then we didn't see much activity. But it was an exciting thing to cover.
All it takes for a population, if I understand, is a female with cubs, right?
I think so. I don't know the definition, but yeah.
So that doesn't take much to change reality up in places like the Loxa or the North Fork of the Clearwater, eh?
Yeah. Well, it's been identified as prime grizzly bear habitat and a place that they, that's the reason they were going to drop some bears in so many years ago, is because the habitat is there for them. And now it looks like they're starting to find it on their own. Slowly.
They can't call them Canadian bears, can they?
Right.
They are our bears, right?
That's right. They're coming from Montana, the Cabinet Yaks. They're coming from the Selkirks.
Yellowstone.
Yep, Yellowstone. Different places in Montana. So
I'm wondering if all this change, if a year from now we're going to be, what's the issue a year from now that you think we're all going to be talking about? Nicole, let me start with you. I know I'm throwing that, but you're out on the ground. You're the outdoor.
Sure.
Right. What are sportsmen going to be talking about? What are outdoor people, hikers? What are they going to care about?
I mean, I think the big thing in outdoor recreation now, and that has been a conversation for a while, has just been access. There have been a couple studies with some like GPS companies that have pointed out how much federal land and state land is inaccessible because it's bordered completely by private land. There have been a couple different conflicts with, I know that you reported on this, and I've kind of picked up this torch with the Wilkes brothers and some of the roads that they've closed off, and they're selling off some properties now. So there might be some owners who might reopen some of those, or maybe this becomes an issue where instead of one person who has, or brothers in this case, who have these giant swaths of land, that it becomes numerous private landowners that folks are trying to go around to and figure out how to get access to places that they've always been able to go to. So yeah, there's been some issues in the Wood River Valley, and just kind of all over the place. I think that'll continue to be a big thing for us.
Keith, what about you?
Well, I hope we're not talking about COVID-19 in a year. That's the main thing I'm thinking. But I think on the stuff I cover, I think there are going to be potentially big things happening at the INL. There's John Wagner, the director out there. He's in the research and development side, not the cleanup side, but he's expecting this summer that they could meet some deadlines in the 1995 agreement, and that spent nuclear fuel can be brought in there for research, which is a pretty big deal that's been going on for a while. I think another thing that I read a lot of federal lawsuit type stuff. I don't know how much that will affect Idaho, but of course, President Trump, that's probably his biggest legacy. He appointed more than 230 federal court judges, and 54 of those were appeals court judges. He flipped the number of appeals courts, and that's more than a quarter of the appeals judges out there. Of course, 3 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think those will be 2 things that will be showing up a lot next year and talked about, though. That's what I think.
Good point. Eric?
Well, of course, we're going to be talking about fish. It's something we always talk about, especially up in this neck of the woods. We've had a pretty just terrible 3 or 4 years of fish runs. I think the spring Chinook run that the Jack counts last year were not good at all, so people aren't optimistic about that. Steelhead, they ticked up a little bit this fall. They weren't anywhere where people want to see them, but they weren't as disastrous as a couple of previous years. So I think we're going to be talking about fish. We're going to be looking at how conditions change in the ocean, whether we'll get a natural bump. We had Governor Little's salmon work group that sort of a first of its kind in Idaho, where folks came together and they really agreed that we need to save salmon, and they set some pretty robust goals for that. Now the Northwest governors, Northwest tribes are going to begin a collaboration. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And of course, we had the lawsuit that we just talked about. That's probably going to be just a lot of briefs filed in the next year. But I'm very interested to see where the fish issue goes.
Me too. Well, guys, I'm going to open it up now. I've got a few questions here from our audience. So I got a question. Do we expect national monuments to grow or shrink with every change in administration? That wouldn't seem to be a good practice, but hey, the new administration is looking at reversing Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante shrinking by the Trump administration. What do you think? I mean, do you think this is just going to go back and forth?
Well, I hope not, but we'll see. The pendulum does often swing on environmental policy, and this, with national monuments, it hasn't been something we've seen a lot in the past, but we have seen Democratic presidents look to bolster their environmental legacy by declaring monuments, often in Western Republican states where it's highly unpopular. So it's becoming a political weapon to be wielded by both sides. So it'll be interesting to see, but perhaps Biden will sort of re-enlarge those two monuments that Trump shrunk, and we won't see much more of that in the future.
I think Biden will enlarge, and that's kind of the sense I get from talking to various people. But there are lawsuits out there challenging the legality of Trump shrinking those two monuments, and we might get some clarity once those lawsuits are settled.
Indeed, the way that a lot of happens in these administrations when they turn is perhaps the new administration, all they have to do is settle those lawsuits and just go back to where it was. And they don't have to argue the intent, whether they should go back and forth, which I think is the way to go, or the way that I think will be the easiest route for them. But, somebody asked me the other day, the way that this has been resolved elsewhere, certainly here in Idaho twice, when people wanted to make national monuments, we ended up making wilderness in the Hawaiis and of course the Boulder White Clouds. It would seem to me that Representative Bishop missed a great opportunity to resolve this issue in Congress by not following the lead of Mike Simpson. But who knows? The next question is they want us to talk a little more about climate politics in Idaho. A lot of people are rising temperatures, increasing drought, along with our lawmakers are still fighting the science. They're still fighting. There are lawmakers who still don't want our kids to learn about climate science. And what do we think's gonna, is any of this gonna change this year because of the change in a national level? Let me start with you, Keith. You're sitting in the legislature. What do you think?
I remember a couple of years ago when the governor spoke at the IEF. He was there in person, and he basically said climate change is real. I wrote a story. It was national news that a Republican governor would say it was real. Going forward, though, I think most Republican lawmakers in the state legislature, they are not going to go that far. In fact, I would venture to say a lot of them consider it a hoax, just like Trump. So I can't imagine anything coming out of the state house to fight climate change. I just don't see it.
What do you think, Nicole? What do you hear in your world?
I think, I'd have to echo what Keith said. Governor Little's statement was the first thing that came to mind for me as well. And part of me wonders, if that didn't sort of mobilize some folks in the legislature to dig their heels in a little more. I really don't. I think we would be, I'd be surprised to see anything on climate and climate change in the legislature this year, just because there's been so much focus on COVID-19 and undoing some of the governor's executive orders and limiting, or not executive orders, some of his emergency declaration powers and whatnot. So yeah, I would be pretty surprised to see any acknowledgement or any kind of response there, other than maybe digging in heels a little bit more.
Well, I think one thing that we can watch closely is the stimulus package that Biden's going to unveil here probably next month. I got to believe that there's going to be a lot of things in there that are going to affect Idahoans, for whether, you were talking, Keith, about electric cars at the Idaho National Laboratory. One of the infrastructure issues, it seems to me, that we're going to need in the next decade are places to plug our electric cars into, and fast charging places. And I would suspect that's Idaho Power wouldn't mind that. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for farmers to, maybe they're going to start handing out farmers money to farmers for sequestering carbon. So, those kind of, it does seem a plan like that could have a big impact even on our economy. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think that's right. That could happen. And I think you're pointing in the right direction, in that that leadership to address climate change will come from the federal government and, the Biden administration working with Congress to do something, rather than something coming out of our state house.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch in that regard. So none of you guys handle urban growth as a topic, but any one of you want to comment on our fast growth and what it's doing in our communities? You're in a different place than we are. Eric, what do people there think about that issue?
We need some up here. Actually, people probably wouldn't be real fond of it, but Lewiston hasn't seen the big growth of sort of the southern Idaho cities and corridor, or the Spokane Coeur d'Alene corridor. So yeah, that's not a topic I dive into a whole lot.
How about you, Keith? Or is it get on your agenda very often?
Just a real little bit with regard to the, Idaho has a pretty big surplus this year, more than $600 million, which is astonishing considering it's a coronavirus pandemic. And state officials say part of the reason for that is so many people moving to the state, bringing outside money. And of course, the legislature is dealing with property tax issues. It has to do with growth. So I covered a little bit along those lines, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
But where it affects your world, Nicole, is, there's a lot of people now camping, and especially with COVID.
Oh, absolutely.
Last year, we've had a lot of people out in the wild.
We have, yeah. So Ridge to Rivers, the agency that kind of brings everybody together to manage all of our trails here in the Boise foothills, they just had a meeting earlier this week. Some trail use has doubled and tripled on some trails in the last year, and they're attributing that both to population growth and to the pandemic, which has driven people outside, globally and nationally. So they're looking at potentially on some trails putting in schedules to alternate user groups. So it'll be, Tuesday, Thursday, it's for mountain bikers, Monday, Wednesday, it's for hikers, just to sort of mitigate some of that impact. I know we've had all kinds of stories from around the West and from national parks about the amount of litter that's being left behind. That's been true in some of our national forests here too, that they've just dealt with an overwhelming amount of litter, and in some cases destruction from people going off trails, riding motorized vehicles off trails. Here in Boise, we're having a big issue while we've had some precipitation or some, melting of frozen trails throughout the day, that folks are just turning them into an absolute mess. It's causing a lot of erosion issues. So definitely the population growth is not inextricable from the environment issues.
Fascinating. Well, it's I've still got room if somebody's got a question they want to jump in with. One of my questions for you guys is, the environmental issues have become so much more, how do you say, people care about environment in a way that they, I would say certainly 30 years ago, didn't care as much about. Things like water quality, all of these new people moving in here, what are you hearing from people? What I hear is that conservatives are just as worried about issues like, muddy trails and, river pollution and things like this. What are you guys hearing?
I tend to hear that. One issue that erases partisan lines, I've noticed, is public land access. The Wilkes brothers were mentioned earlier. There's been some proposed land trades up here, and you tend to see some strange bedfellows in opposition to things like that. So yeah, I think as the state grows, people are going to continue to covet time outdoors and care about the environment and clean water and clean air.
One thing I've noticed is I don't think there's an acre of public land in Idaho that there isn't somebody or a group of people willing to fight for, willing to have their say about. And I think that's, Idaho is really astonishing. a little more than 60% public land. You have these, right here in Boise, you can get on your bike and you can be on public land in the foothills in just a couple of minutes. It's really just an amazing thing, especially since I grew up in a state with very little public land. I think most people just don't realize what a great resource that is, and a lot of people do, and I think that's part of the reason so many people are moving here. And there's no shortage of voices to defend access to public land or just the public lands themselves going forward.
So Nicole, I'll let you wrap it up.
Sure. I mean, I just have to echo what Eric and Keith have already said. There's, you have groups like the Idaho Wildlife Federation, which is mostly for hunters and anglers. You've got backcountry hunters and anglers, the group, and then you've got folks who are more on the traditional environmentalists, what we think of as the left-leaning or liberal view on that. And folks really do come together. I think everybody who's had a chance to experience sort of the wilderness of Idaho wants to protect it for whatever, things that they enjoy about it. And that kind of brings folks together over all kinds of different things.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is really one thing that does, at a time when we're all talking about unity and bringing us together, I do think that's the public land in Idaho. We actually do love it. We fight over it, but we do care a lot about it and want to protect it. And no matter what side you're on, you're looking at a way of protecting it and keeping it. And access has changed. When I was first covering stuff like this 35 years ago, access was all about anti-wilderness. Those darn wilderness people are cutting off our access, but you could still get into all those areas. Now, access is about private land. It's changed. It has brought people together like that. And I think that's, as President Biden looks for some model to how do we bring folks together, I think Idaho is actually a pretty good place to start. So, Andy, we're pretty close here. I hand it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Rocky. And I want to thank Nicole Blanchard with Idaho Statesman, Keith Ridler with the Associated Press, and Eric Barker for the Lewiston Morning Tribune being part of our media panel. And we really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. It was great to sit here and just listen in on the conversation. In fact, I wasn't sure exactly how this was going to work and if we would have any technical problems or not, but it was going so smoothly that I ended up opening up a can of red velvet myself. And it was sort of like what we would do in person if we were able to meet in person, because we usually would, at this hour, we would open up the hosted beverages and hors d'oeuvres in the back of the room at the end of our legislative gala. So again, thanks to the four of you for spending some time with us today and highlighting many of these interesting issues that we deal with in Idaho and with the future here in the state. I want to again thank the Langdon Group for helping underwrite today and making it possible to happen. And to Jack Herring, our Idaho Environmental Forum Administrator, for pulling together not only today's live event, but also doing a lot of work with our previous programs that we recorded and have posted online. So thank you, Jack. This session has been recorded and will be uploaded as well to our IEF YouTube page for future viewing. So for the people that were here today live, and if you enjoyed it as much as I have, I'm definitely going to use social media and email to share this event once it's posted, that we can have more people tune in and see a recording of this event. So it is an interesting time that we're in. We cannot meet in person, and that's been our mission for 30 years of lunch programs or this afternoon program that we've been doing since 1997, I believe, with the legislative forecast. And we hope to, again, be together soon, later this year, once we have the pandemic under control. And so until then, I just wanted to tell everybody to stay healthy and stay safe and healthy. And we will see one another in person soon. Good night, folks.